No-knead bread baking is a great thing for many reasons, but when it comes to producing the best bread possible, I don't think there's a substitute for the multi-step process and longer proofing times of more traditional bread baking methods using natural leavening. Plus, there's something very satisfying and therapeutic about actually kneading bread dough. Besides the extra 10 minutes of kneading called for in this recipe, which can be done with a mixer too, it's really not much more involved than the no-knead techniques. It just requires a little extra planning ahead. This recipe came through my interest in duplicating, as closely as possible, the famous Poilâne bread of Paris. While my attempts fell short, they ultimately led me to a fellow bread baking enthusiast whose efforts were successful and whose recipe quickly became one of my all-time favorites. It makes a loaf with great flavor and texture, with the added bonus of supplying a high percentage of whole grains. I think it's best to start this recipe in the evening, this being the first of a three-stage process. The first step is super easy. We start with about 2 cups of whole wheat flour and mix in 7 ounces of water and a half cup of sourdough starter. I like to dissolve the starter in the water first before mixing them both together into the whole wheat. It's just easier to incorporate the ingredients this way. It takes about a minute of stirring the starter into the water before it's fully dissolved, but then it's really easy to mix in with the whole wheat flour. And get everything to incorporate well together. Okay, that's all there is to it for the first step. Now all we're going to do is cover it with plastic and let it sit out at room temperature until the next morning. Okay, it's been 12 hours, it's the next morning, and we're ready for the next step. So let's see what we have here. What we have here is basically a whole wheat starter, which we're going to transfer to a larger bowl. To this we'll add more water, flour, salt, and then knead for a while. I'll start with the water, 274 grams, which works out to about 1 1/4 cups. And I'll just mix that up a bit. Then I'll start adding the various flours. 170 grams of spelt flour, which is a kind of wheat. 170 grams translates into a little over 1 3/4 cups. "85 grams of rye flour, which is a little less than a cup. Now this is where I add in the salt when it's still easy to mix into the dough. This is 13 grams of salt, which is a little less than a tablespoon, which I guess you'd call a scant tablespoon. Okay, and then finally 250 grams or about 2 cups of unbleached, unbromated bread flour or all-purpose flour. And I'm going to hold back a little of the white flour for kneading purposes. Now when you start adding the white flour, it doesn't take long before the dough starts to get pretty stiff. And at some point it's a little too stiff to really work effectively with the dough whisk. And that's when you want to start using your hands or turn it out onto the counter to knead by hand. So it's starting to get to that point where I really can't knead it very easily with the whisk. So I'm going to start using my hands here, which to me is the fun part anyway. Now some people prefer to just do the entire kneading within the bowl, but I like to turn it out on the counter. There's, like everything in baking, there's scads of ways of doing everything, and they're all right. It's just a personal preference. Okay, so we're pretty much done with the bowl. I'm just going to lightly flour the counter. Okay, I'm going to knead for about 10 to 12 minutes, and I'm actually going to use a timer, just so I don't accidentally spend all morning doing it. We've got a little extra flour to work with, so we're going to use that generously to keep the dough from sticking too much. Now, the thing about kneading is you really don't have to work at it very hard. You just use your body weight and kind of lean into it. Of course, how much you have to lean depends on how stiff the dough is. But this is a pretty medium stiffness dough. It's pretty easy to work, so it doesn't really take much effort. All I'm doing is turning it a half a turn, pressing down, and then folding back over. Quarter turn, fold, press, quarter turn, fold, press, and just repeat that. And what you're going to end up with ultimately after about 10 minutes of this is a nice silky smooth dough. And this particular dough is going to be a little bit tacky, but not real sticky. So it will want to stick to your hands, and there's really hardly any way around it. You just keep them floured and don't worry about it too much. Okay, after 10 to 12 minutes of kneading, the dough is ready to go into the refrigerator for a long, slow fermentation period. Now, when you're done kneading, it's not hugely different than when you started, but there's a little bit more elasticity to the dough, and it should be, as I mentioned, tacky but not sticky. And I think you can see that if I zoom in a little bit and depress my hand into the dough and lift up. It kind of wants to stick to it a little bit. It's tacky, but it doesn't really stick to it, so it's not sticky. So what I'm going to do is take that same large mixing bowl that we started with, only I've cleaned it out, and I'm going to mist it real lightly with a spray of olive oil. Any kind of cooking oil will probably pretty much do. And put the dough inside and turn it a little bit to coat it. And that's just so it's easy to get out the next morning. This is an optional step, but I always do this. And I'm going to give it one more little hit on top, because I'm going to cover it with plastic. And it's going to rise. Take a good look at how much of the bowl this fills. It's maybe, I don't know, 1/4, 1/3 of the bowl volume is the dough. But there's a good chance it'll rise up to the top, and we don't want it to stick to the plastic too much. So now, I'm just going to place it in the refrigerator for 24 hours and come back tomorrow morning for the last major step.